Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today, we're going to take a look at the studio catalog of a much-loved band on the progressive rock scene, a band that's been asked for many times here on the channel from quite a lot of viewers. It's a band, I'll admit, that I've always been very aware of. I had like a 2-disc compilation for many years, but I just never really, for whatever reason, because you can't listen to every single band out there, a band that I just never really got into. But in hearing all the requests coming from all over the place and going out and kind of re-listening to that compilation I had, I was like, you know what, this is probably one of those bands that I should dive deeper into the catalog and start to, reacquaint myself with their music on a larger scale. So I've started doing that, accumulating some CDs and things like that. I've gone out and I'm pretty versed in the whole catalog now, so it's taken me a while, but I figure I'm at the point where I'm ready to deliver a show to you guys. So I don't own everything by them because some of their stuff, especially the more recent albums, and more recent meaning like, since the 90s, because they broke up for a while and then got back together. A lot of those are kind of hard to get, but the early part of the catalog and some of the 80s stuff is you can kind of track those things down. But I don't have everything, but like I said, I've listened to all of them. So I'll show you the CDs I have. The ones I don't, we'll just kind of talk about. So I will say, obviously they have some albums that are way better than others. And that's not surprising. I think, their kind of peak period was in the first half of the 70s. And then they went through kind of a weird phase in the 80s, as a lot of prog bands did right around that time. Then, of course, they broke up, and then they came back in the 90s and, have been kind of periodically releasing stuff since then, of which some of it's pretty good, some of it's okay. I will honestly say I don't think any of these albums are, awful. There's some that are just kind of, not great, not very good, but have passable songs on them. So, like I'll say, even the ones at the bottom of my list are not very good, but they've got some good tracks, right? So, but I think that this was a band that, especially early on, were pretty damn spectacular. So, starting off, we got 14 albums. So, starting off at number 14, I'm going to go to 1980 for their album called The Album. All right, it's basically Caravan, the album in black and gold, right? Here you have the lineup of founding member Pi Hastings on vocals and guitar. You've got Jeff Richardson on guitar, viola, flute, and vocals. Dave Sinclair on organ, piano, other keyboards. Dec Messakar on bass and vocals, and Richard Coughlin on drums. So, this album was pretty much kind of not taken too kindly by a lot of the fans. This is a much poppier album, and let's be frank here. The music of Caravan always had this kind of poppy, jazzy. Oh, Jesus. Gotta love these spam calls, right? It's crazy. The music of Caravan always had this kind of quirky British pop thing going on. Again, they're listed as one of those Canterbury bands. So the Canterbury bands, of course, you got Soft Machine and Caravan and maybe Hatfield in the North and Matching Mole and Gilgamesh and National Health, and you can maybe throw in a little bit of Gong kind of fits into that thing, sort of. Right, you got Egg, maybe Camel a little bit. So these kind of very quirky, British bands or European bands who kind of interjected pop and jazz fusion into their little kind of proggy stew, and very different sounding than most of the other bands. So Caravan especially have their own unique sound. And so back to the album in 1980. So here they kind of dropped a lot of those kind of jazzy and a lot of the prog stuff from their sound into more of a kind of quirky British pop album. And it's got its moments. I mean, there's definitely some decent songs on here, and even the songs that are kind of very poppy are still pretty catchy. Corners of Me Eye, Bright Shiny Day, Clear Blue Sky, Golden Mile. These are all fairly pleasant songs to listen to. The problem is you compare them to the early material, and it's it's kind of like night and day, right? So that's going to come in at number 14 for me. Number 13 is going to be the album that came after it, which is called Back to Front. I think this album is a little bit more successful. It's got basically the same, mostly the same cast of characters. So you got Pye Hastings again, Dave Sinclair, Richard Sinclair, okay, here is on lead vocals and bass. Richard Coughlin again on drums. You got Mel Collins shows up playing some saxophone. All right, so Mel Collins, of course, from King Crimson, Camel, and like a million other bands. The always excellent Mel Collins. Here you got, the title track is Back to Home, Back to Herney Bayfront. Videos of Hollywood, pretty good song. You got Proper Job / Back to Front, which is like the kind of little epic track kind of thing. These guys were known for like early on in their career doing these epic long tracks, but at this point in time in 1982, doing a lot less of that. Bet You Want to Take It All, Hold On, another pretty good track. So not a terrible album. Like I said, it's got its moments. Okay, it's just still not classic sounding Caravan, and I think again, it's the 80s. A lot of these prog bands were having the exact same issue right around this time. So we're going to go now, for my number 12, we're going to go up to 2013, okay, for the album called Paradise Filter. This is actually a pretty good album, okay, so for some of their latter period albums, it's actually pretty strong, and I think some of the stuff that they've done post the early 80s is actually stronger than those two early 80s albums. And the one thing about Paradise Filter that I kind of dig, it's like, I think if you like Dire Straits, it kind of has like a little Dire Straits flavor going into it. If you kind of remember Jethro Tull's Crest of a Knave album, which also kind of had like a little Dire Straits feel to it, I kind of get that with the Paradise Filter album too. And I think it's more of a guitar album than some of their earlier stuff. Their earlier stuff is much more keyboard oriented, whereas I think Paradise Filter from 2013 is definitely guitar-ish. The vocals, some of the guitar work definitely has that Mark Knopfler Dire Straits feel to it. So not really a bad thing. Pretty enjoyable album. Number 11, we're going to go to 1994's Cool Water, which again is kind of like I don't want to call it a compilation album, but it's like it takes like this band had a bunch of like old recordings that never made it to albums, as well as an album that they put together for Arista Records back in 1978 that they wound up recording and not releasing and shelving. So this kind of has all those original tracks on there, finally released. It's not too bad. Here you got Pye Hastings still with the band. Obviously, you got Jimmy Hastings, okay, on saxophone, Jan Shellhouse on keyboards, organ, piano, and mini Moog and all that sort of stuff. Rod Edwards also on keyboards. Richard Sinclair on bass. John Gustafson on bass, okay, well-traveled John Gustafson. Richard Coughlin on drums. Ian Mosley, okay, also of Marillion, also appears on drums here as well. Some of the kind of highlight tracks here, Side by Side is good. The title track I like. The Crack of the Willow is actually a very good song. To the Land of My Fathers, Poor Molly. Some good stuff on this album. I think this is pretty good. It's a shame they didn't release that back in the day when they originally recorded it, right? So coming in at number 10, we are going to go to 1995's The Battle of Hastings. Okay, so this again is 1995. This is their big kind of comeback album. All right, band is back together. It's not a bad album. I mean, it's kind of laid back, as is a lot of their stuff. But I think it has some pretty cool tunes. I think the song Liar is really good. Okay, It's Not Real. Traveling Ways, pretty good song. Most of the stuff here is written by Pye Hastings, okay, who is also, again, back in the band, of course, leading the things on lead vocals and guitars. Jeff Richardson's back once again on viola, violin, clarinet, guitars, mandolin, tambourine. I mean, he was kind of like silently the MVP of this band, playing all these instruments, right? Dave Sinclair on keyboards, Jim Leverton's on bass on this album, and Richard Coughlin again on drums, with Jimmy Hastings also supplying some saxophone and flute and things like that. So that comes in at number 10. Number 9, going to go with the Unauthorized Breakfast Item. Okay, so this is another one of their later period albums. This is from 2003. Probably the strongest out of the latter period releases. And again, these are really hard to get. I actually tried to get a bunch of these, and they're just, they're out of print, and whatever ones you can find used, they're like, through the roof expensive. But here we've got the lineup again of Pye Hastings, Jeff Richardson, Doug Boyle on lead guitar, Jan Shellhouse back on keyboards, Jim Leverton on bass, and Mr. Coughlin on drums as always, with Jimmy Hastings contributing some sax and flute, Dave Sinclair on keyboards on a couple tracks. This has got Smoking Gun, Right For Me, pretty cool tune. All right, you got It's Getting a Whole Lot Better, near 9 minutes long. In fact, there's a bunch of like lengthy tunes on here. I think they're trying here to recapture some of the early spirit, okay, of the band. Okay, you got Nowhere to Hide, Okay, Head Above the Clouds. Revenge is a pretty cool song. Got some couple good rockin' tunes on here, but for the most part, it's a little more laid back, and again, that kind of jazzy, proggy feel from the early albums. They're trying to recapture that as best they can, and I think it's actually, out of all the latter period albums, I think the songs here, you can feel they're really trying to kind of recapture some of that old magic. So it's a pretty good album. I think it's pretty enjoyable. Number 8, okay, we're going to go to 1977's Better by Far. So this album is one of a couple albums released in the kind of latter part of the 70s where they're starting to get much more commercial sounding, because they've had a little bit of success, but of course every band and their label wants bands to sell albums, right, and maybe have singles and stuff like that. So here, and this is produced by Tony Visconti, and this was I think 77. Here you can see, feel, and hear Caravan injecting much more pop into their music, but it still has those little kind of jazzyisms, I think, that made them very, very unique. Silver Strings, The Last Unicorn, Feeling All Right's a fun tune. Nightmare, which closes out the album, is pretty cool. Man in a Car. I like the kind of interplay between the quirky keyboards and the guitars and the reeds and woodwinds and things like that. So violin, all that kind of stuff. It's just a very kind of eclectic sound. Again, maybe not proggy enough at the time, this album, for the prog crowd, and still too prog for the pop crowd. I think that's probably the problem that this band has had throughout their careers. Like, they just kind of don't fit very neatly into any of these little boxes, right? And that's, people always like the boxes. All right, number 7, we're going to go back to 1978, their debut, self-titled Caravan. This is actually, out of all of their albums, probably the most different sounding, because again, late 60s, these guys, formed not too long before. Very psychedelic in nature. If you listen to the first Soft Machine, the first Gong, all those really early albums from a lot of these Canterbury scene bands, a lot of that psychedelic late 60s flavor is kind of embedded in all of them. So here, this is before, their second album where the Caravan kind of trademark sound really came to fore. Here, it's still in its infancy. So some of these tunes, like, Place of My Own, Policeman, Cecil Ron's, Grandma's Lawn, still very psychedelic and playful in nature. All right, but a lot of organ on these. Organ and electric piano, that's mostly what this album is filled with. But then you get Where But for Caravan Would I? 9 minutes and change, finishing out the album. That's where you're starting to hear that fuzzed out organ tone. That was very, very indicative of this band, okay? You got Love Song with flute, okay? Magic Man, Ride, Policeman. I think it's still a cool album. It's, it's kind of, the production is kind of really lo-fi and what have you, and the band's still not kind of where they would be shortly thereafter, but still a fun album, a good listen, and again, that kind of late 60s British psychedelic scene, right, that's very much embodied in here. Number 6, Blind Dog at St. Dunstan's from 1976. I actually like this album quite a bit. I know some Caravan fans kind of shit all over this one, but I dig this. I think this is a fun album. I think, again, this is kind of where this album and Better by Far, which came after it, I think is where the band really started to kind of move away from the lengthy epics and move more into kind of quirkier pop territory, but there's still a lot of plenty good material on here that's very, very enjoyable. You got Here Am I. What else? Jack and Jill is a great song. Okay. Can You Hear Me? All the Way. It's got half the tracks are 6, 7, 8 minutes long. The rest are short little pop ditties, and I like those two, Chiefs and Indians and stuff like that. So I think a good album, and as an enjoyable kind of British prog, Canterbury pop album, I think it's a lot of fun. Again, here we've got, a lot of the same folks still on board. Got Pi Hastings, of course, Jeffrey Richardson, Jan Schellhaus on keyboards, Mike Wedgwoods on vocals and bass on here, as well as Richard Coughlin, of course, on drums, and Jimmy Hastings on flute, alto sax, tenor sax, and clarinet. Produced by David Hitchcock, who actually would produce most of their early mid-70s albums. Okay, David Hitchcock, of course, also worked with Genesis and various other bands, pretty notable on the British prog scene there for a few years. Okay, So, number 5, I am going to go with an album with a hilarious title. And again, if you turn the first letters of each word here around, you'll kind of get what the kind of the joke is here. But Caravan, Cunning Stunts. Okay, always dug the album cover. And then you kind of open that up, and there's the guys right there. So here, this is another fairly popular album for them. Like I said, this came out in 1975, so this has Hastings, Dave Sinclair, Jeff Richardson, Mike Wedgwood, and Richard Coughlin, okay, with Jimmy Hastings also on various brass and reeds and things like that. Here we have some really strong tracks. You got The Show of Our Lives, a lot of fun, Stuck in a Hole, No Backstage Pass, okay, Welcome the Day, Lover, all fine tunes, kind of jazzy, kind of poppy. And then on side 2 of the vinyl, you got the big 18-minute long track, the dab song Concerto, okay, which is basically like a six part epic. These guys love doing these like sidelong epics. It's funny when you talk about like prog epics. A lot of the usual suspects come up. It's any song off of Tales from Topographic Oceans, any one of those big long 20-minute tracks, or Supper's Ready by Genesis, and all the usual suspects. It's just funny how nobody ever mentions Camel's big epics, because they had one on almost every single of their early albums, and they're really good. Okay, so I dig this album. I think it's good. Like I said, some of these, they're just really fun, bright, uplifting listens. And that's kind of what it's all about, right? So next up, coming in at number 4, we're going to go with Waterloo Lily. So Waterloo Lily came out in 1972. Okay. Here we got Pi Hastings, guitars and vocals. Steve Miller, not to be confused with the American Steve Miller, on all sorts of keyboards, electric piano, Hammond organ, harpsichord, all that stuff. Richard Sinclair on bass and vocals, and Richard Coughlin on drums, with some guest Lox Coxhill on soprano sax, Phil Miller, second lead guitar. Phil Miller, of course, would National Health guy, Jimmy Hastings, Mike Cotton, Barry Robinson, all sorts of people showing up here, adding some orchestral elements. You got the title track, a lot of fun, very quirky. You got Nothing at All / It's Coming Soon / Nothing at All reprise on one of their epics on the album, over 10 minutes long. Very, very cool. Lots of great keyboards. Songs and Signs, Aristocracy. Sorry. 2 of the like kind of quirkier little poppier tunes on here. Then you got, of course, The Love in Your Eye / To Catch Me a Brother / Subsultus / Debauchement / Tilbury Kex. Near 13-minute long epic, and that's one of the cool things they've always did. That's another thing I always liked about this band. They really wanted to be different. Almost all of their big, long epic tracks, it's not one like title. It's like comprised of like 3, 4, or 5 titles. So it's all like this big, long sentence almost, so to speak. And then the album ends with The World Is Yours. Pretty cool artwork here. All right. Big favorite of a lot of people, and comes in number 4 for me. And what do we have next? Aha. Okay, so for their 5th studio album, we're going to go to 1973's For Girls Who Grow Plump in the Night. Plump in the Night, what does that mean? Well, you can kind of figure it out. But I know at the time this was kind of a controversial album cover. You got the pregnant woman on the bed, right? It's like, how did that happen? How did she grow plump in the night, right? Here we've got Pi Hastings, Jeff Richardson, Dave Sinclair, John G. Perry on bass, Richard Coughlin on drums, okay, with Rupert Hine on synthesizer, Frank Riccardi on congas, Jimmy Hastings on flute, Paul Buckmaster on cello, Tony Coe, Pete King, Harry Klein, Henry Lowther, Jill Pryor and Chris Pine, Barry Robinson, Tom Whittle, all sorts of people adding for some additional orchestral elements. It starts off with a very, very cool, another lengthy track to open up the album. Again, this is from 73, in case I didn't mention it, for Darum Records, produced once again by David Hitchcock. Memory Lane, Hue / Head Loss. One of my favorite tracks from this band. It's got this great, cool opening guitar riff. Just really cool riff, and then it moves into this very, very melodic, memorable, proggy epic with lots of cool keyboards and tasty guitars and things like that. You got Hoedown, you got Surprise, Surprise, you got the Jesus, I can never say this. Cthulhu Thlu, something like that. Anyway, very cool proggy track on here. The Dog, he's at it again. Another cool track. Be All Right, Chance of a Lifetime. And then, of course, finishing off with another epic, which got L'Auberge des Sangliers, A Hunting We Shall Go, Pangola, backwards, A Hunting We Shall Go reprise. So again, one of these funny titled lengthy tracks, and the reason why they kind of titled them like this with all these different kind of attachments, so to speak, is because these songs, it's almost like they went into the studio and recorded a bunch of tracks and took a few of them and just kind of pieced them together to make this one long epic and make it flow. That's kind of because there's a lot of changes in these songs. They go from one feel to the next, and so it kind of makes sense. So basically, this one long track is taking you through all these different kind of movements. So I dig this album quite a bit. This is, for me, it's got the orchestral arrangements added in, so it's got that very big symphonic sound, but it's also got some cool, like, rockier stuff on here and the bits of jazz. I like this album a lot. I think, my top 4 are pretty spectacular. Number 5 and 6 are also really, really good as well. So, all right, so now we're down to the nitty-gritty. All right, the top 2. I think probably for most folks, the top 2 will be the same, especially for, real loyal Caravan fans. These are probably their most well-respected albums. However, I'm going to go a little bit against the grain. I think what a lot of people are going to pick as their number 1 is going to be my number 2. Again, I kind of debated these two because these two are both equally pretty damn good. But I'm going to go for 1971's In the Land of Grey and Pink, okay, with this cool kind of like Tolkien landscape painting for the cover. All right, here's the guys in the band. So released April 8th, 1971, also for Demerham Records, produced by David Hitchcock. So here we've got the lineup of Richard Sinclair, Pye Hastings, Dave Sinclair, and Richard Coughlin, with, of course, Jimmy Hastings contributing some flute and sax and piccolo, John Beecham on trombone, David Grinstead on cannon, bell, and wind whistles and things like that. So here you've got, the kind of silly but really quirky Golf Girl, written by Richard Sinclair. You got Winter Wine, another pretty fine song, Love to Love You, and Tonight Pigs Will Fly, a Pye Hastings track, another cool, brief, quirky tune. And then the title track, In the Land of Grey and Pink, which is kind of majestic and grandiose. Gotta love their more kind of this big sound, right? Because these guys could really, the way they combine like rock and jazz and classical elements and psychedelia, it just comes across really kind of, it's symphonic, but it's different symphonic. It's not like a Genesis symphonic, And then here, side 2, you've got the near 23-minute track 9 Feet Underground, which is broken up in 8 different sections. Again, a lot of very cool organ tones. You got mellotron throughout this album as well. Tasty guitar licks. These epic tracks just kind of take you on a journey. This is one of their best. All right, 9 Feet Underground. Definitely another top 10 Caravan song. Really, really good album. Would be my number 1 if it wasn't for 1970s. If I could do it all over again, I'd do it all over you. Love the humor in their music and their song titles and things like that. So, and you just, if I could do it all over again, I'd do it all over you. I'll let you guys think about that a little bit. But again, released in 1970, produced by Terry King for the Decca Records label. Here, again, we have the lineup of Pye Hastings, Richard Sinclair, David Sinclair, and Richard Coughlin, with, of course, help from Jimmy Hastings, Robin Sylvester, David Jupe, Terry King, and Maurice Haylett on additional instrumentation, engineering, and all that kind of good stuff. Another fantastic album. Like I said, I think for me, I love the organ tones on this album. Just absolutely love it. I think to me, this and In the Land of Grey and Pink are at their most proggy, letting the jazz really come through in the music. The title track is incredible. And I Wish I Were Stoned / Don't Worry is the track number 2, 8 minutes and change in length. Very, very cool song. This album kind of retains a little bit of the psychedelic stuff from the first album, but you can see the band is really kind of changing and maturing here. As I Feel I Die, With an Ear to the Ground / You Can Make It / Martian / Only Cox / Reprise, 10-minute long track to kind of end up side 1 of the original vinyl. Okay. And then you've got the amazing, For Richard track, which is just absolutely incredible, which kind of finishes out the album. It's got dun 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 dun. It's like one of their most notable tracks. Okay, great. You get Hello Hello, S4 Terry 25, Can't Be Long Now, /Francois, /For Richard, /Warlock, again, most known as For Richard, and then closing it off with the brief little quirky limit. So just a really, really great song. And if you get the remaster, right, you get some cool bonus tracks. You get A Day in the Life of Maurice Haylett, which is very cool. Clipping the Eighth, Hello Hello As I Feel I Die, and Why, which is kind of like a different version of And I Wish I Were Stoned. So very, very cool album. For me, it's my favorite Caravan album, but like I said, it's so close between these two. But I'm going to go with this one. I just think this is, for Richard alone, it gets my nod. But you can't go wrong with either one. So there we have it. So recapping the list. God, 25 minutes talking about Caravan. Who knew? If I could do it all over again, I'd do it all over you. Coming at number 1, In the Land of Grey and Pink from 71. Number 2, For Girls Who Grow Plump in the Night. Number 3. Number 4, Waterloo Lily. Number 5, Cunning Stunts, not the other way around. Number 6, Blind Dog at St. Dunstan's. Number 7, Caravan. Number 8, Better by Far. Number 9, The Unauthorized Breakfast Item. Number 10, The Battle of Hastings. Number 11, Cool Water. And number 12, Paradise Filter. Number 13, Back to Front, and number 14, The Album. There you have it. So for all you Caravan fans, curious to see, how you guys rank them. Because again, I'm, for the most part, this is not a band I've been listening to for, decades and decades and decades. So I have, tried to get very acquainted with their music over the last, 4 or 5 months. So, even though I knew, their more notable tracks from the collection I had for years and years and years. But I dig it. Good band. Really good band. So curious to see how you guys rank them. And in the meanwhile, this is on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Coming up tomorrow morning, more deep track dive. Hopefully tomorrow, going to bring you ranking the albums of Golden Earring. Also this week, ranking the albums of The Police, Tool, and Primal Fear. So stay tuned for all that. We'll see you real soon, gang. Bye-bye.